of a civilized, humane society now more than ever. And I want to turn first, Randi, if I may, to those issues related to a humane society and, the importance of basic human rights. Of necessity, I want to turn first to the Dobbs decision from last week. And a two-part question. One is, what was your gut reaction to hearing that the decision had been released and what it said? And then second, where you feel that public higher education institutions, colleges, can go in, put it simply, defending the right of women to have reproductive autonomy.
So I have been both a high school social studies teacher as well as a lawyer in my life. So I had many, many different feelings when Dobbs was finally issued. I didn't think it was going to get any better from the original Alito decision. And frankly, as you and I both know, Alito was the justice who wrote the Janus decision.
That's right.
If you think about it,
yes,
this new majority, extremist majority in the court, basically have focused on the end that they want, and then they come up with whatever so-called reasoning to get there. So their end was they wanted to overturn Roe. They wanted to get rid of the fundamental right to privacy. The fundamental right to privacy. And Thomas wants to get rid of everything connected to that. Contraception. He wants to be in your bedroom. He wants to get rid of the right for everyone to marry. And so when I saw that, the Dobbs decision in the detail that Alito and Thomas and others went to, what I said was, this is the call to action. This is the first time in 50 years, maybe ever, that the Supreme Court has pulled back a right in modern history instead of expanding justice. So the anger you hear in my voice right now, that's the anger that I had when I saw the final decision. But it was a call, and it is a call to action, because they have said, these 6 judges, in a week or 2 weeks' time, they've basically eviscerated the separation of church and state. They have hobbled states from actually keeping their citizens safe. They've hobbled the EPA. And I'll go back where I started. You see this with what Alito did in Janus. It's a contract issue. It's, if a union gives you services, you pay for those services, just like any other contract, any other fair share. It's not a First Amendment issue. But because they're so ends-driven, because there are people they want to enrich and support, and there are people they want to undermine, that's what Alito did. That's what Thomas has done. And now they have 6 judges to virtually do anything. And if this is not a 5-alarm fire, I don't know what is.
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned, there's a real palpable fear that we have heard from our members. In essence, what comes next? We have, if you're paying attention at all, as you said, to the Thomas opinion in this case, to what's coming out of statements of or indications of what cases they're going to be taking next fall, it's clear that the Voting Rights Act is right in their crosshairs, what's left of it, and definitely further attacks on privacy and individual choice. And my question to you, and I know you've spoken so eloquently about this so often, where do educational institutions fit in? Where do schools, from pre-K through 12, and then institutions of higher education, what can we do in the face of this onslaught from a small minority of extremists?
So there's a few things that we can do. And, I kind of, as you and many others have heard me say, I think we look at the world, we look at elections, we look at crossroads in history through a lens of hope or fear. But what is actionable about hope is action. If you act in furtherance of hope, then you start making changes. You can't be a bystander. The most important thing we can do is to vote in November. The authoritarian playbook is full of attempts to get people to despair, be cynical, or be apathetic. That is part of their playbook. Now, we can go to social media and all sorts of other things, but to give up. The antidote to that is to act. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't also be on the streets and we shouldn't also do other types of things. But what happens in terms of education, Shanker used to say, and this used to be one of our mottos, education for democracy, democracy for education. What education does is it helps people have agency. It helps people have power. And so if we take the muscle of understanding, the muscle of the labor movement of organizing and mobilizing and voting, then we, for example, if we can get 2 more senators in the United States Senate, then I believe we can enact and codify Roe. And if we codify Roe, then what happens is the Supreme Court decision is a nullity, because Roe as a statute then would, what they said is in the absence of a statute, there's not a right. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody's not going to come back and say that any abortion is unconstitutional, but that's then going to be a fight for another time. I'm starting to believe that we should really think, that 9 judges on the Supreme Court is not an immovable target. Right. Maybe we should have more judges on the Supreme Court. We've had different numbers of judges. There's not a moment in the Constitution. There's not something in the Constitution that spells that out. So that's right. My point is we have to act. And the most important ways of acting is voting. And what we as educators do is we teach about democracy, which is what a democracy is. It is by the people and for the people. And what we also do is we teach agency and empowerment by teaching life skills and critical thinking. So it's the muscles of democracy, it's the muscles of critical thinking, and it's the muscles of voting.
And I think that really, throughout American history, schools, institutions of higher education have had the potential to serve that role. And in our best of moments, like after World War II with the GI Bill, with its flaws, because there were flaws in that in terms of the exclusion of African Americans and people of color, and for the most part, women. Having said that, the institutions can play such a vital role. If you look at the institutions of government with Congress that appears to have and it is in part because of the way the Senate is split 50-50. Congress has a very difficult time getting legislation done. It has been done. There have been some major achievements just during the Biden years. But with Congress somewhat hamstrung by the 50-50 split in the Senate and the continued existence of the filibuster, and with the courts clearly under the sway of a minority, we turn to the president. The president's poll numbers are not good, but I think to a large extent he gets a bit of a raw deal because there isn't enough credit to what he has been able to do. And I know that he has been a friend of labor, like no president, perhaps going back to Truman or FDR. I don't know, but I would ask you in your dealings with the folks in the Biden administration, how is he on education issues and on labor issues?
Joe Biden is, I've often said, He was our go-to person when he was, President Obama's vice president. He's a very humane and a very decent man who is getting blamed for lots of stuff that is well beyond anybody's control. And just like COVID was not Donald Trump's fault, the issue really becomes, how do you handle it as president? How do you array what we have to array? And what's happened is that I think that there's just so much that has gone on. It's easy to blame the president for everything. But I think what happens is that his basic decency has in some ways hurt him in the polls because, he is not bombastic. He is really decent. He tries to explain things to people. He tries to actually say, this is what's going on. He tries to problem solve. I think what's happened is that we're in an intense on supply chains, on all sorts of other things, the supply issues, around Christmas time and continuing. And I think what we've also seen is a huge taking of advantage by oil companies and big pharma of all of these issues. And they have stoked inflation. And then on top of that, you got the war in Ukraine and Putin, who has also tried to basically stop grain shipments from Ukraine so that he creates a drought and a hunger emergency as well as an oil emergency. So you got a lot of problems that thankfully we have someone who has real experience to try to deal with these things. But what he's facing is the other frustration of Americans who basically want our lives back.
Yeah.
We want our lives back the way it was, but better. And it's a lot of frustration. And he gets blamed for all of that. And I think that what's now happened, though, is the gun violence, the effects of what the Supreme Court has just done is actually shaking people up to see that our freedoms are really at stake. And if you think about it, the other thing that's going on, when did you ever hear the opposing party say that their number one job is to make a president unsuccessful?
Yeah.
So what's happened in our government right now is that there is a division and a hatred that is unlike we saw maybe other than the run-up to the Civil War, where instead of service to country taking a priority during a major crisis, it is always whose advantage is what when. And I think that's a huge difference now from, frankly, any of the major crises we've had in modern history. I think that's part of the problem now. That's why it's so shocking on some levels, even though it wasn't enough, that we got something done in terms of gun safety, because Americans demand that, and they do not want rights eroded. They want freedom, they want normalcy, and they want their lives to be better. So I'm more bullish on what's going to happen in November, but for all the wrong reasons. It's because of the extremism that has happened, and I think it's the extremism has kind of gotten people out of what has been, I call, a COVID malaise of, just despairing about everything. And as I said before, despair and apathy and cynicism are tools of the authoritarian, and activism is tools of a democracy, a vital democracy.
And I think we can really see that, as you alluded to, in the national crisis concerning guns and gun violence. Speaking personally, I was thinking about how I remember exactly where I was when the news about Sandy Hook broke. I remember exactly where I was when I first got the alert on my phone about Buffalo. I don't remember where I was when I got the news from Uvalde. I don't remember where I was when I got the news from Highland Park. And for myself, I'm afraid that I'm almost becoming numb from these tragedies, one after another. I worry about our members who work in hospitals, who work in college campuses, and who are in very insecure areas. I wonder how you think about the millions of members of our union and our collective safety. That combined with the population being fearful of almost going anywhere because these events are happening with sickening frequency.
I also remember exactly where I was when I heard about Sandy Hook, when I heard about Parkland. I was overseas in Buffalo, so I did not actually, until I got back to the States, I talked to people, but I felt it like a ton of bricks when I got back to the States. Uvalde just felt like Sandy Hook again, and it just rifled, no pun intended, rifled through. And this weekend, I just couldn't believe what happened in Illinois. So this is what I think a lot. I constantly go from anger and frustration to, is something solvable? And, and maybe that's how we're built. Maybe that's why we're labor leaders. Maybe that's why we chose what we do. Can we make a difference? Can we solve something? And what I think about a lot is that the level of mass shootings, this does not happen in other countries. You've had what happened in Copenhagen, you had what happened in Oslo, but we have a shooting every day. Yep. The weekend of July 4th, there were multiple people who died in Chicago as a result of gunshot wounds because of guns that are easily accessible. It's part of the reason why the Bruen case, what the Supreme Court did in the Bruen case, last time I read the Constitution, I don't remember the word AR-15 in the Constitution. No. I think the last time I read it, Second Amendment said muskets. Yeah. Muskets and AR-15s are really different guns. Even from somebody who's not a hunter, it's pretty obvious that they're pretty different. And so this sense of other countries, UK, after the Scottish massacre in a school, they basically said, you can't have these weapons of war if you're an ordinary citizen. There's nothing in our Constitution that says you can have these weapons of war if you're an ordinary citizen. Musket, not an AR-15. New Zealand, they made it very hard, not only to get guns, but they banned these weapons of war. Same in terms of Australia. Yep. So what does that mean? When you ban these weapons of war with these multiple, like the killer in Highland Park, how many bullets did he expend in less than a minute? Yeah. 70. Yeah. And in these rifles that are not for hunting, but are for killing. If we ban these weapons of war, we would have a fighting chance not to have these mass shootings. Right. If we do the kinds of things that New York just did again, I give Hochul a lot of credit, bringing people back in, saying, okay, what can we actually register? What can we actually do? I think we have a shot, no pun intended, at real gun violence prevention, background checks, safe storage, limiting magazine capacity, outlawing or banning these weapons of war. I think these are the big things that we have to do that have overwhelming majorities in support of them. And I think that if the Supreme Court continues to defy that by having its own basically six people making a decision about what the Constitution says when there's no doctrinal evidence for any of that, I think that there's a check and balance in terms of looking at, again, the numbers on the Supreme Court.
Exactly. And you said it before, there's nothing in the Constitution about the size of the Supreme Court. There is discussion, and I think it's very valuable conversation to have on the subject of, in terms of the Supreme Court, perhaps the way our court is established where it is pure chance. Jimmy Carter was a one-term president. He didn't appoint anyone to the Supreme Court. Donald Trump, remember, was elected by a minority of Americans. He appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And this pure chance then determining what our rights are and how we shall live is mind-boggling and perhaps made sense when there was the court was just being established, which framers, as you know, framers really didn't know what they wanted in the Supreme Court. That's just that they wanted one. What shape it would take, they didn't know. And so it's like any other institution needs to change.
But I would actually say one more thing, Fred, about this, is that just like the first president, a lot of, and sorry, it's like going back to Democracy 101. There's a lot of things that the framers and the founders did that were wrong.
Yes.
But the first president said he was going to be there for a limited period of time. He was thought very long and hard about what that meant as the first president. Marbury versus Madison, one of the first major cases, justices thought long and hard about what that meant.
Yes.
What is 2 things because I have never been in favor of enlarging the court until when I saw the spate of decisions this year. Even the Janus decision, which I thought was wrongly decided, I cannot actually articulate how he did it other than saying he didn't want, unions. Alito doesn't want unions, so he was going to find any way to defund us. But if you're a lawyer right now, this is what you see. These 3 justices that Trump appointed and were confirmed by the Senate, all 3 of them lied to the Senate.
Right.
They lied to the Senate. They said that Roe, all 3 of them, in words or effect, said privately and publicly, Susan Collins has said this, that Roe was settled law. If you're a lawyer, if you actually are a practitioner about the rule of law, one of the things we know is that law is built, and interpretation of law is built on precedent.
Right.
What does precedent mean anymore?
Yeah.
They don't care about precedent. They care about their personal ideological views. It is antithetical to what that third branch was supposed to be. The Supreme Court has become an extremist legislative engine as opposed to an interpretive engine based upon these decisions. And that's why I'm more alarmed than simply as horrible as the Dobbs case is and what it does in terms of the personal women's, not just right to choose, but family's decision about family and how the court interjects itself in that. How the court interjected itself in a state being able to protect its citizens, how the court interjected itself in deciding it knows better, this court knows better than the EPA about climate.
Right.
So I think what's happened is that they have become such an extremist body that no one, if you're a lawyer, how do you advise your client now? You used to say, this is the precedent, this is predictable, this is what jurisprudence is. And what they've basically said is, nope, we make a decision every time we want to make a decision. It has really rocked. And this is part of the reason why I think they have gotten, in the last Gallup poll, they have lost a lot of faith and credibility because unlike what the court did, the first court in Marbury versus Madison, and in trying to say what we do is we interpret the law. We do not make the law. And what they have decided to do is that these 9 people appointed for life make the law, not interpret the law. And that's why I think that one of the most important things right now in this election is our freedoms and making sure that the sanctity of those freedoms are based upon law and fairness and justice, not on personal ideology. And that's why voting becomes so important.
Absolutely. And it is a case, right, where we almost have to, we've gotten into the habit that every election that comes along, we say is the most crucial election we faced in a generation. And we're doing it again because of what we have seen transpiring. I wanted to, because I think we're a bit up against the clock. I wanted to give you a slightly different question. And we've talked about this, Randi, you and I have. Every now and then during the summer, you come up to my neck of the woods in upstate New York, to Cooperstown.
Yep.
So I want to ask you, on your trips to Glimmerglass, for those who don't know, you need to find out about Glimmerglass and go. My wife and I still have not made our annual trek. Tell our audience what opera means to you and what music means to you.
I love musical theater. It's one of the things I grew up with. I loved when we could get to Broadway. It was a lot cheaper when I was growing up than it is right now. You could actually sneak in for the second act. I went to public high schools and public elementary and public middle schools that believed in music and had the funding. I mean, we fought for it, but had the funding, had, plays and musical theater and things like that. And summer stock. And so for me, Glimmerglass is kind of a combination of musical theater and opera. And my wife loves opera. And so what Glimmerglass is it's opera and musical theater. And so what music and opera means to me, and then I'll talk about Glimmerglass for a second, is it's part of the joy of learning. It's part of the joy of life. It's part of imagination. It's part of losing yourself in something that's about art. We had a webinar right after the Uvalde massacre under Share My Lesson where we talked about, and we had a great child psychiatrist, Dr. Pam Cantor, and we talked about advice to parents and to teachers and to kids about what you do after a mass shooting. And one of the major pieces of advice, you have to be honest about what happened in an age-appropriate way. Acting to solve, acting to change is one of the most important things you can do to make life better. And so for kids, music, art, sports, what stokes their passion. For adults, too. Yeah. That's what Glimmerglass is for me. That's what musical theater is for me. I just was lucky enough to go see Into the Woods, which is Stephen Sondheim on Broadway. We took a night off and we went. And it is about how you stoke your passions. I was the stage crew head, the production manager in my high school plays. I learned how to use a hammer. I learned how to put a set together. It's really helpful if you own a house every now and then. But it's these kind of things that just, create a sense of passion and purpose and joy. And what Glimmerglass does, I think, for upstate New York, and I've watched upstate New York go through all the different kind of economic ups and downs, is that you think about all these kids and interns coming up to upstate New York for a summer. And Francesca Zambello, who's still the current director, really believes in getting schools involved and educators involved and kids involved. And And the economic development for Cooperstown and for Schoharie County, which is the county next door, is really, really important in terms of helping to fund a community. And the fact that kids see and have this accessible is really important to them. And so, it is part of how we keep growing communities and revitalizing communities to have these kind of summer opportunities all across, the country. And upstate New York, for those who have not been there, it's just gorgeous. The rolling hills, the dairy farms, the rural way of life, the small town way of life. Your town, Fred, every time I go through Cobleskill, it is worth saving and worth investing in. And that's part of what Glimmerglass does in terms of economic development.
Yeah, well put. And it is amazing how that as an institution, Glimmerglass is so important, as you said, to the region at so many levels, and just plain beautiful and a wonderful place to spend a few days.
Let me just say one more thing about it.
Yeah.
I love that Glimmerglass now goes up to one of the state prisons, I think it's Attica, and they perform one of their operas for the inmates, and the sense of connection and hope for redemption is really important. They're very, very thoughtful about how to be a good citizen in terms of upstate New York.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, not surprisingly, this has been a wonderful conversation, Randi. I appreciate you taking the time and joining us in your very busy schedule. I look forward to seeing you. By the time this airs, it'll be probably right around the time that the convention is starting in Boston. And so it'll be great to see you and to get together with everybody across the country as part of the AFT family.
Let me just say one more thing to your members, Fred, and to you. What we've tried to do, what you've tried to do. I mean, look, I think you single-handedly helped save Downstate Medical Center so many years ago. And look what Downstate became for COVID. Without Downstate, Cuomo would not, that former governor would not have had, that became the main COVID hospital in Brooklyn, in New York City. But the SUNY centers across the state, they are the engines of the economy. They are also foundational for the nurturing of education all throughout the state. And that's your members. That's our members. That's the academic workers who are there every day, lifting aspiration, nurturing minds, and creating the future. And they need the academic freedom, and they need student debt canceled, and they need to have the investments, and they need all the stuff we're doing in the, New Deal for higher education. But, you're at the center of that nourishment. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you and all of those who were a part of the downstate struggle and the continuing struggle to make public education what it must be, the engine of opportunity, but also the factory for democracy. So thank you very much, Randi. I will see you soon and looking forward to it.
See you soon.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
And now, here's 3 things to know. State lawmakers have taken a step toward making abortion rights part of the state constitution by passing a broad amendment that would also make it legal to access and use contraceptives. The measure, called the Equal Rights Amendment, would also bar the government from discriminating against anyone based on race, ethnicity, national origin, disability, or sex. Sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and pregnancy are also on the list of protected conditions. The move is a direct response to a June 24th decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which nullified Roe v. Wade and ended constitutional protections to seek an abortion. The State Assembly and Senate voted in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment July 1. Nothing will change quickly, however. Amendments to the state constitution require passage by two separately elected legislatures and then must be approved by voters in a referendum. Voters won't see a referendum until 2024 at the earliest. One of three environmental bills signed into law by Governor Hochul July 5th will beef up existing building codes and appliance standards, which will make buildings more energy efficient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The new laws also require the Public Service Commission to develop standards for utility-owned thermal energy networks and mandates prevailing wage for renewable energy projects 1 megawatt or larger. That's down from 5 megawatts per project. Hochul signed the bills less than a week after a Supreme Court decision that said the Environmental Protection Agency lacks the authority to regulate carbon emissions from power plants under the Clean Air Act. United University Professions released a June 30th noon statement about the Supreme Court ruling, calling it a devastating blow to the fight against climate change. You can read the statement on the UUP website at uupinfo.org. Hochul said the new laws show that New York is committed to reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions by 85% from 1990 levels by 2050. The governor signed two new laws June 26th that provide more support to New York's LGBTQ+ community. Hochul signed a bill that established the Lorena Borjas Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, which will support organizations that provide crucial services for transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. The fund is named for Borjas, a well-known transgender and immigrant rights activist, who the New York Times called a guardian angel of sorts for the transgender community in Queens. She died of COVID complications in 2020. Hochul also signed a bill that requires political parties to create gender-inclusive ballots that allow non-binary New Yorkers to be elected to party positions. The new ballots would add a non-binary gender X as a gender designation, ensuring that non-binary people can participate in the state's political parties. And now, here's Fred with Kowal's Coda.
Thanks, Mike. Before I start on the Coda, I just wanted to say one thing. It was a great honor and just a lot of fun to have that conversation with Randi Weingarten. I would never correct my national president, except in this one case. She mentioned my role in the fight to save downstate. The fact of the matter is, I was one of many individuals involved in that fight. And the folks at downstate, led by Rowena Blackman Stroud, her executive board, activists throughout that chapter and in the community, fought together to save that hospital. But as I said during the course of the conversation with Randi, the fight goes on, as do so many others. And it's important that we continue to fight together with our national affiliate leaders, with NYSET, our state affiliate, and of course, each and every one of us as part of the union movement. And now, on to the Coda. Let's face it, for those of us who have spent time fighting for social justice, these recent days, weeks, months, and years have been tough. In challenging times, I turn to music and books, among other things, to help me find inspiration, and sometimes just to be distracted. In terms of music, a band that has been around since the late 70s, off and on, has given the world music that has raised issues of environmental destruction, militarism, and racism like few rock bands have. And I've been following them since around the mid-'80s. The band is Midnight Oil, and they've given us a new album that is perfect for these days. Even the title says it best. Resist. From track to track, the lyrics call for action to stop the madness we're being subjected to and to aggressively attack the great challenges like climate change and racism that we face. But as usual with the Oils, and certainly at their concerts, which I've witnessed 3 times, including just a couple of weeks ago, the songs also get you active, wanting to move and dance and sing along. Though they are on their last tour, and this could be their last album, they are certainly going out on top. Next, there are few writers who can match the masterful art of Walter Mosley, who has elevated the crime novel to the status of literature while also bringing to life characters who live in racism's cruel shadow, while maintaining their simple humanity. Well, recently, I've discovered a writer who comes close to Mosley's skill, and that's Attica Locke. A good starting point, in my humble opinion, are her 2 Highway 59 novels. They are dark, troubling examinations of the nature of America's long history of racism in rural East Texas, and they're also damn fine mysteries. But even her badly flawed characters carry with them the potential for redemption if they could only make better choices. Their humanity is what draws you in as a reader, as does her incredible descriptions of the land and her references to classic blues music. So treat yourself. Check out Bluebird, Bluebird, and then Heaven My Home. Attica Locke will impress and move you. That's it for this time. Stay safe and well. Good night and good luck.
The Voice Podcast is a production of United University Professions. You can find UUP on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at uupinfo.org. UUP is on the web at uupinfo.org. This episode was produced and directed by Mike Lisi, UUP's Director of Media and Publications. Special thanks to UUP Director of Administration, Lynn Alderman. Thank you for listening.